So welcome to the third workshop. And so last time we talked about the CSS flows and we didn't get enough time to talk more about it and how it worked because we had to leave. So I'm going to talk more about that today. And I kind of made a checklist of what we're doing today and what we're going over. So the first thing first is I want to explain you a little bit more details about the CSS box model. Then we're going to talk about floating and positions in CSS. And the third thing I want to talk about is nested CSS, which if you don't know what it means, don't worry about it, but I'll get to it. And the last thing I want to talk about is HTML forms. And as you know, forms are a very important part of web because every website has some kind of form, or some websites are actually built on forms. So I'm going to talk more about it. I will make a form, but we would not record any response or stuff like that. We will do that when we get to a server-side technology called PHP. And if we get time today, I'm gonna talk more about responsive websites and what responsive websites are. That are websites which resize or kind of look different on a mobile device or a tablet or an actual web page. So you don't have to create different copies of your website. Whereas you can make a responsive website and it'll look nicer on any kind of device size. And we will, for this, I'm gonna first teach you the basics and the core behind responsive design and how responsive CSS is written. And after writing a little bit of responsive CSS, we're gonna jump into a CSS framework called Bootstrap, which you might or might not have heard, but it's a framework developed by guys at Twitter. And this framework helps you make responsive websites. And they also have a lot of components and a lot of animations and all that great stuff you could do by writing less code. So let's first start by talking about what exactly a box model is. So if you looked at your developer tools in either Chrome or Firefox, there's something like a box in the bottom which has the margin, the border, the padding. So let's just draw it out and see what the box model looks like, right? So this is going to be the outermost container of the element. All right. So have you seen something like this in your developer tools? If not, then all right. So this is where your content will be. So if you write any text or any kind of image, it's going to be in this area. So now a content can have padding and a margin and a border attached to it. So this is our border, right? So right here. And padding is the space inside the border. So space between the content and the border, that's padding. So you can have a 10 pixel padding that will be from the border. So we will also talk about how do you center divs or elements in a web page, which is with the help of margins. So the margin is the space outside the border. And that's the space between either a different element or space between either your browser window's sides of the window and the element and the border itself. So so the border is counted towards the width. So if you give your content a width of 450 pixels and you give it a border of 2 pixels all around, so it is going to add 4 more pixels to the actual width of the content because the border is included in the calculation of the width. So if you want an element to have a 2 pixel border width, but you want the final width to be 450, then you would give it the total width of 446 pixels, and then it'll add the 4 pixels border, and that's how your final container would be 450 pixels. So so that's about the box model. So let's code something and see how the box model can be manipulated, how we can center a div or an element in a web page, and how automated the process is, right? And we'll also talk about borders, what different kind of border properties we have for CSS. And so for this, I'm gonna go into my folder where I stored my code for last time. and it's in the code folder, and I believe, so I'm gonna copy the, okay, let's see, I need to make a duplicate of this one. I'm gonna call it 02, right? And 02, and I have that, and I'm gonna just open that in my Sublime text. I'm gonna push that to the side, and I will open my index page in the browser. So let's get this on there. Right, so last time we got like some basic layout and some basic HTML and some tables and styling working, and we also got the box like a generic web page working. And so you asked me like, why is there a space here between the list items and the branding? So let's see how would you find out why is there a space and what element has the space, right? So we open the Chrome Developer Tools and we kind of like hover over each item and find out like why is there a space, or was, yeah, so we just need to find out why there's the space and why it's not attached. So we can see that our list item does have our unordered list does have a margin of 16 pixels on top. You can see it right here, right? So to remove that space, we can give it a 0 margin. So like you can see, there's no more space anymore. So to fix that in our CSS code, we will go back to the css01.css where the code is. And I don't think we have anything for the margin for the unordered list. So we'll make a new CSS property for unordered list and specify margin top, and this will be 0. And we save it and refresh it, it's going to be the same. So you understand like how you can like debug or find out if there's any margin or any extra padding you don't need using the Chrome Developer Tools, right? So that's important, and you'll use that very often. So last time we kind of ran over it, like creation of this. So I kind of want to start from a little bit more scratch, right? So I'm going to create a new file and call it 02.html. And I think I'm going to copy, actually no, I'm just going to start from scratch. I'm going to also create a new file 02.css. So I'll close everything else I don't need. And I'll just I have a snippet of HTML code which I don't have to type in, so I just type in like your basic doc type HTML. Inside the head you'll have your title, your body, and enclose the HTML tags. Inside the title I'm going to put in CSS box model demo, and I'm going to link my style sheet. And to link your style sheet, again, you do link rel equal style sheet and href pointing to the style sheet location, so it will be 02.css. So once that's done, let's open this page in a web browser. Obviously it's going to be blank because we haven't put anything in it. So let's get this. So let's make a div and give it a class of container. And so for HTML, we'll just do that. We'll go to our CSS file, and we want to call that class container. And you want to give it a width of 500 pixels and a height. The height, I'm also going to specify the height to be 500 pixels. And just so we can see the difference in that, I'm going to give it a background color of 767676. I don't know why I chose that color, just random.
Is it
That is hexadecimal color. I think it's gray. Now let's look at something, right? So I want to figure out what is the width of my web page. Now, okay, so when you go over the HTML, it gives you a better idea. So currently my browser window is 640 pixels, right? And let me go back to my Sublime text. And it's 640 pixels, and I have 500 pixels of width. I kind of want to center it. So I would do like simple math. 640 minus 500. And I want to give it both the same size, so I'll divide that by 2, right? So that'll be 70. So I want to give it a margin of 70 on left and right, right? So I'd give it a margin. And if you remember, like how margin, you kind of give like clockwise. Yeah, correct. So you can give it, all right, 70 pixels top, 70 pixels on the right, 70 pixels on the bottom, and 70 pixels on the left. So we don't really need the top and the bottom style margin for now. But let's just see what happens. So once you do that and refresh the page, you see how it's kind of like centered, even though I still feel like it's more on the right side. Let's check it out. Okay. Yeah, so container. It is getting so many pixels. I guess maybe it's right, it's just me maybe. I don't know. But anyways, you get the point, like how it's kind of centered, right? So imagine you wanted to make this element center on your web page, and you would give it a padding depending on what your browser window is at that point. But as you know, not every computer has the same resolution. So now if there's someone tries to open this on a bigger browser, this item's not moving. So that your calculations are wrong. So now you kind of have to recalculate your margin again. And it is practically impossible to calculate margin for every single resolution. So to automatically center an element, you use something called auto. So which calculates the margin automatically depending on the browser width. So I can say 0, which is I don't want any margin on the top or the bottom, but I want auto margin on the left and the right. And when you do that, you see how it's like kind of centered. And now when I change the browser window, it's kind of moving with the browser window. So this way, it's always going to be in the center. So we saw like the margin is outside the container. I'm outside the border content border, right? So let's give this a border. And so there's 3 different border properties: border style, border width, and border color, right? So these are like the most common border properties you will use. So I think it kind of gave like what options you have. So if you look at what options for styles you have, you get like dash, dotted, double, or groove, hidden, and inset, none, outside. Like there's a bunch of them. You don't have to remember anything. You kind of use like reference when you're trying to code it, but once you get used to this, you kind of remember like the famous one, which is solid, which will just make a solid border. Then there's dash, or you kind of just don't have a border and you give it none. So in this case, let's do a solid, and we'll give this a width of 10 pixels, and we'll give this color of let's give it black. So now when we refresh and see like how it's a thick border around it, right? And so now let's give it a padding and see what happens, right? So remember, padding also uses the clockwise. It goes from top, and so let's just give it 5 pixel padding all around and see what happens. And if you specify, obviously, if you specify just one parameter, it's going to take it for all around. So on doing that, I guess let me put like increase this so you can see it properly. See how like it got bigger? So let's use the Chrome DevTools and like figure out what just happened, right? So it gave a padding, and you can see like there's a padding of 50 pixels all around, and this is the borders right there. We have a padding, and then we have the margins on the side. So obviously you can't really see what happened because there's no content in the div. So let's just put some content in the div, and let's put some random lower MIPSum tags and see like you see how like the text is inside the 50 pixels all around. So that's the padding, and the border is like 5 pixel border. So it's like, do you understand like how the what's the main difference between margin and padding? Because that's very important, right?
Yeah.
Any questions on that?
I mean, I see it, but both look like a margin to me. Just that the padding is inside another, like the main margin.
So you have your border, right?
Right.
That is like a division between your margin and padding. So if you do a padding, your content will push inside the border. So the content spacing will be from the border. So if I do, like in this example, I did a 50 pixel padding, right? So the 50 pixel padding is right here.
Right.
And the margin, if I do a 50 pixel margin, the margin is going to be from the browser window or from the element to the border. Now you get it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I figured out reference, yes.
So once that's out of the way, we kind of talked about floats, right? Let's do a float. So let me change some items. And I'm going to give this a width of 100% because I wanted to cover the whole screen. I talked about percentage last time very briefly. So basically what percentage in terms of pixel does is that it kind of calculates your browser window and it takes percentage of that. So if I specify a width of 100% for this container, it's going to find the width of my browser window and it's going to cover the whole 100% of it. I'm still going to leave the height to be 500 pixels. I'm still going to leave the background. Then I'm going to remove the margin, border, and the padding. Right? So let's see how it looks. And so you see how it has like a white space around it on right here. So that is because the body itself has its own default margin. So to clear that, you can do a body style in your style sheet, type in body element and do margin 0. So that will clear that white space around it and it'll cover the whole thing. All right, so now they're done. Let's go back to our HTML, remove our placeholder text, and let's make 2 divs. And let's call one to be left and other one to be right. Can't type. And in both of them, let's put some placeholder text and see what it looks like. Remember, we don't have any styling attached to either the left or the right class. So see how it kind of like broke into 2 different lines? I guess let's just put the body margin on so you can kind of see it. All right, yeah. So now we see like it starts lower MIPSum and it ends right here. But even though there's space there, it starts a new line. So why it does that is because of default properties attached to divs. So the divs have a property called block, and that is a display property attached to like some elements, which including the div, which by default. And what block means is that it will take over the whole space of that item. So for example, we hover over the left class right here, and you can see like inside the container, it's taking the whole space, even the right. So technically there is no space for right to join in with the left. So even if I specify a width to the left and the right, it's still gonna be taking up that whole space. So let's do a width of 50 pixels. Actually, that's too small. Do like 200 pixels. Okay, you see how like even though there's so much space right here, it's still not letting the right one go in because the divs are blocks which they take up the whole space inside either a body or the container. You can obviously change the display properties, but we will talk about more about display properties in a bit. So first let's figure out what float is. Float is for floating elements to either left or right. It's kind of like, it actually means like floating it to the left or to the right. But for a float to work, it needs to have a specified width, either in percentage or pixels. So let's make the width of the left to be 45 pixels, and I also want to do that for the right. I want to make it also 45 pixels, right? So it almost takes half of the place. The reason I'm doing 45 pixels is because I want to kind of give it like a little bit padding on the sides so it doesn't look that bad. So now if I want my left to appear on the left and my right to appear on the right here, then I would give it a property called float, and I would define float to the left, and I would also define float to the left. And now you can see how it's taken up space right here, and I want to give it a padding of 5 pixels and padding of 5 pixels right here. So it looks a little bit nicer, but anyways, so see, so what is float means is like float me to the right. I'm not gonna take up the whole space, but get the contents around me get close to me. So like now if you do an inspect element on the left, you see how it's only covering the much part of it, and the rest of it is just the right side because it's floated.
We're gonna see later how to like. I mean, this is either left or right, but we're gonna see how to put like in the middle later, right?
So if you want to put it to the middle, I talked about the margin auto.
Is that what we do?
Yeah, so that's the way you put anything in the middle.
In the middle, but like, can we do like one part, like this part on the left, this one in the middle, this one on the right? You know what I mean? Like, so that would be like a left, a margin, and then a right.
Yeah, so let's do that. That's a good idea. So let's make something middle. And I kind of want to make you like just notice something, right? What happens?
Sure.
And I'm obviously going to put the same text. I'm going to give it just different color so you can differentiate between what it is. So I'm going to give this color red, color blue, and I'm going to give this color yellow. Right? So you see what happens. Right? So this one's the left, this one's the right. But wait, we never specified to the middle one that float to the left or float to the right. Why is it getting that? Right.
Continuing?
Yes. So if you specify a float, it will continue to the next element unless you manually stop it. So to stop that, we have to specify something called clear. And you either would, in this case, like you would specify either you want to clear the left float or the right. But it's always a good practice to just clear both if you don't need it, right? It will clear, it doesn't matter if you put in left or right, it'll just clear it. So now if you see it, it's going to be in the next line. right? So now, as you said, you wanted to make it in the middle, right? So let's give it a margin of 0 auto and give it a width of, again, 45%. And let's see. See how it's in the middle?
Nice. All right. Makes sense. Because what it's actually doing in the middle is kind of like compressing it in the margin.
Yes, it's giving it, so if you look at right here, so it's calculating the margin on the both sides for it to be in the middle. So now in this case, if I increase my browser window, it's always going to be in the middle.
Right. So it's better to use percentage, right, than pixels, I suppose. Because in that way.
Yes and no. Some cases you will use pixels, like for example padding and stuff like that. You want to use pixels, but you obviously can use percentage for that case. It kind of depends on what you're exactly trying to do. I mean, they're both useful. If you're trying to do responsive design, you mostly use percentage. You'll get into responsive design later, and you see like how important the percentages is, right?
All right.
So after that, I want to cover something called dry. So what dry is not only like a web development property. It's in any programming language. Basically, it's right. The idea is to reuse the code so you don't have duplicating code. So in our case, we can see like, okay, we're left, right, and middle. What things that are common between them, right? So the most common thing is the width. They all have a width of 45%, and the left and right have a float of left. So like if like in this case, it's not that relevant that we have less elements, so like we can still use like the same styling and reuse the code. But once you get to a bigger project, and if you like start reusing the code, you get to one point where you have a lot more CSS file doing the same thing, and it's like the file size, performance, everything kind of depends on it, right? So you want to optimize the way you write your code. So let's optimize this code so it uses less lines of code and it looks a little bit nicer too, right? So let me comment this out for now. We'll keep it as a reference. And to comment quickly in the Sublime text, you do Command, Alter, and slash, and I'll do a block comment on it. So we keep that for reference. So let's first get the width, right? So to define like multiple properties to like different elements, to define same CSS properties to multiple elements, you can like put a comma and specify more CSS like elements. So I'm gonna specify left, right, and middle. So like you see how I put a comma, and now I can call in the three of the properties, and I'm gonna give it a width of 45%. So now if we save it, we're going to see like everything else is broken, but everything has a 45% width because we use the commas to separate it. So I think that's the only thing which is similar in all three. Now let's get to left and the right. And the thing similar in the left and the right is float. They both float to the left, and they both have a padding of 5 pixels. And I believe that is it, right? And let's go to individual and give them their remaining properties. So that's just color red. Middle is what color? Yellow. It also has a clear on both, and has a margin for 0 and auto to center it. And I believe that's it for the middle. And for the right, we specify color of blue, right? So now we see like how we're kind of reusing the code, so we don't have to type in the same width again and again. So for example, now we have to add a new div called middle 2. All you have to do is add a comma and type in middle 2, and if you assume that it's going to have the same properties as middle, you have to just type in middle 2 and it'll work. So like you kind of reusing your code and typing, like you don't have to retype it again. Let me remove the middle 2 or I'll give errors. So it's going to be the same thing. So it's not changing your output of the CSS, just like how efficient and how better code you're writing, because you got to remember, like like styling might change, like anything more will be added to it. So the end goal of this workshop, which I have in mind, is to make a portfolio kind of website, a responsive portfolio website. So there's going to be the topics about your About Me section, like your portfolio items. So we'll talk more about the project later on, but let's just continue with what we're doing right now. So we added that. So the next thing I want to talk about is nested CSS. So what nested CSS? Let me show you what nested CSS is, right? So let's say I have I want to make this part a link. So to do that, we use the A tag, which is also known as the anchor tag, and we're just gonna put a hashtag, which means it doesn't really go to a location. It's just a placeholder or a location of an ID, right? So this is gonna be our link, and if we refresh it, that's our link. So let's say I want to style this link color to be yellow, but I don't want to give it an ID or a class. So how would I do that? So that's when nested CSS comes in. So let's remove this code because we don't need that anymore. And so remember, I want the element I want a anchor tag is inside the class left. So what I could do is I can call the class left, and I could put a space or a greater than sign and type in the a anchor tag. So what that means is that inside the left tag, find me an anchor tag, and I'm gonna give it a color of, let's say, what I said, yellow, right? Yeah, so give it a color of yellow, and let's not select anything. Refresh. See how it's like changing the color? So like for example, you'll have like let's say you have a list right here with 5 list items, and it's let's say for example this list is in the middle class, right? And you wanna have every list item style to be none. So the way you would, let's just put some random text, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, indented properly. Save it and see how it looks, right? So it's a list item, but I want to give it a list style of none, which means that I don't want to show the bullets. So I don't want to give it a class because I don't feel like giving class to each and every list item. So the way I would do that is I would select my middle class, which is the topmost class. Inside that, I want to select the unordered list, and inside the unordered list, for every list item, I want to give it a list style of none. So now we save that, and there you go. Bam. So the nested CSS gets very useful once you get to like little bit more complicated items or elements when you have your list. And sometimes you'll feel like instead of giving it a specific ID or class to every single item, I can just do this, and it's so much easier.
It makes sense, but now how about like let's say I have 2 reference, like the first yellow comment you put on top, and what if I have 2 or 3 in the same paragraph, and I wanted to change the color of only 2 of them instead of 3?
That's a good question, right? So let's just copy this and make just paste it right here. So if you do it now, obviously it's going to remove that, but what if I don't want to remove that from the second one? So for that, you will have to give it a specific ID or a class.
All right.
Right? Because that's how you'll know that this is different from the other one. So let's give this an ID. We haven't used IDs much, but so let's give this an ID of list 1, right? And here, instead of selecting every single unordered list, I'm just gonna select the list 1 ID, and bam. Right? So much useful.
Nice. All right.
So yeah, as I said, like you'll use more of nested CSS once you get to like a little bit more complicated projects, and like if you see it, and like once you once we get to like more bootstrap, you'll see like how useful it is and stuff like that, right? So talking about that, okay, let me talk about position, right? So what is position? So I think I'm gonna leave that right here. Let's make some space. And actually, I also want to talk about displays. That reminds me. So let's first talk about displays before position, right? So, so what is the? So remember, I said if you go back to our page and like we have our nav bars list items, and we will at some point get them in one line, right? So let's just try to mimic that procedure right here. So if we go to a list item, see how it's kind of like it is it's so list item. Let's see it's if you see it's display block. So what the display block means is similar to like a div. It's gonna take over the whole area instead of giving the other element chance to survive in that area. It's gonna take over the whole div or the whole element. Do you understand that, right? So what you want to do is instead of displaying it as a block, I'm going to kind of display it as one next to each other. So to do that, we will use the display property in CSS and type in inline. So what that means is pretty much self-referential. Like I want it to be inline, but not a block. So now if you see it, everything is going to be in line, right? And you can also make it inline block. So difference between inline and inline block is let me first show you what it's gonna do. It's gonna do the same thing, right? But you would ask me what is the difference between inline and inline block, and so the major difference is when you do it inline, it doesn't. So let's first refresh this and see like what it's looking, right? So right now we specified this. Did we I thought we. Oh yeah. So when you specify it in line, it's gonna be obviously in line. But if you put elements next to each other, it's kind of like gonna collapse next to it. It's almost like a float. Like I want the elements if it's in line, it's almost like a float. Like I want other items around it. I want you guys to come next to me. And I'm not taking up the whole space, so you come next to me, right? Okay. So it has inline has specific properties, and block has specific properties, right? You understand the difference between inline and block. Now the difference between inline and block is like a middle between an inline and a block, which has properties of inline and a block itself. So it is occupying the whole space, but it's displaying everything in a line. So let me just comment this part out for now. Right, so it's gonna be so right now it's doing a display as a block. So let's uncomment this, comment this part out, and type in display inline, and see what happens. So you see how like it's displaying the red text, which is from the first one, and then the right is just like connecting to each other.
Yeah. So connecting them, like I don't see it.
It is because we specified a 5-pixel padding, right? Okay. So there's a 5-pixel padding there, but it's kind of like in line. Everything is like in one line. So it kind of looks like if it's a paragraph tag. So now, if I do this as an inline block, see, it's all very similar to a float because it still keeps the property of being a block and it's still in line. So that's a good property to know because a lot of elements have their own separate what's it called default display attached to them. So there's one more display, which is something you'll use quite often, which is display hidden. Actually, display none, right? And it's vanished. So the text is still there, but it doesn't take up any space. So this is like when you want to hide some stuff or something like that. let's say you hide your stuff, but like you only want to display if the user clicks a button. So have you seen like sometimes like you click the button and something like pops up at the bottom? So yeah, so a lot of websites use that. So display none. Yeah, but there's also a tag called visibility, and I can set that to hidden. And I want you to see like what's the difference there. You see why is there like a space there? So the difference between display none and visibility is that display none takes up no space of the element. Like at times, if you make that element appear, it's gonna reclaim its space. And when you put the visibility, it's gonna have the space in there, but it's never gonna display. Kind of get it?
Yeah.
So you visibility and display none is kind of like depending on what you're doing, you'll use them, but they're good tags to know. So let's put that to default, and yeah, I think right. So position, right. So there's two kinds of position way you could do. So one position is called relative. So what relative position means, right? So let's go back to a container. Let's kind of like close this and give this position relative and see what happens. Obviously nothing's going to change, right? But in the background or something like, I would say like, yeah, I would say it's in the background what it's doing is any position you mention in it, like if you say this item to go up, down, left or right, it's going to move relative to the body, right? So let's move this top, and I want to move it like, let's say 10 pixels, right? And you see like how it's moving 10 pixels relative to the body.
Yeah.
So relative means it's going to move relative to the body or the element. I can also specify absolute. And this will be, actually, the best way to do this is let's leave this right here. And in here, I want to define position absolute, right? And in here, let's move them bottom. And bottom, let's move them like 40 pixels so you can see a major difference, right? See like everything move 40 pixels relative to the container they are in.
That's great.
Can you understand it, right?
Yeah,
so relative is relative to the element it is. Absolute is like absolutely from the page.
Or like the whole thing, like
the whole browser window, like absolutely. Like if you look at it, this is definitely 40 pixels right here. Remember which one did we move left, right? Yeah, so bottom 40 pixels. Get it? So like it's counting 40 pixels from the bottom. So it's absolute to that, right? And there is one more position, and to demonstrate that, let's remove this part. And I think we gotta add more height to this to display it properly. I'm gonna give it 110 pixels height, right? And I'm gonna make the middle, give it a position of fixed. So what that means is this item is never moving, no matter if I browse my page. So it's always gonna stay right here. So I can give it put like a top, bottom, and left and right. So I'm gonna give it like, let's say 50 pixels top, and then you see right here, right? And now if I move my page, you see how like that is still never gonna move. It's always gonna be 50 pixels from the top of the window. So I think, all right, that's about it. I want to talk about CSS for now. Like, obviously, there is a lot of more properties I haven't touched or like talked about for CSS. And like, if I keep talking about all the CSS property, we'll be here for a very long time. But you kind of encounter each property once you like start making some things. and then you're like, oh, okay, I want to do this. Like, how would I do that? So you kind of research online, like, okay, how do I fix something? Like, great point. Yeah, I need to talk about is how CSS like let's say new CSS properties come up. So CSS3 is the latest release of CSS, and it does have new properties which are not supported by some browsers, or some browsers require like a special I would say like a special CSS property for them itself to work. So let's look up CSS WebKit thing box border. I think this is a good reference website. CSStricks.com has like a lot of CSS tricks and stuff like that. Has a lot of snippets of code. So like you can look here in CSS, like what if you want to do like a blurry text? So it has like a bunch of different like snippets you can use and stuff like that. But so what I want to talk about is it's not on this page, but let me just find. So right here, right? So this is box sizing. So box sizing is a CSS property, and it's you can look at it right. Not all browsers support it, so it's not supported by IE, Opera, and yeah, I think that's about it. But there's something interesting to note. The Firefox is supported only if you type in Moz box sizing, and Safari and Chrome are supported only if you type in WebKit box sizing. So that's something kind of put like the right word to call it is prefixes right here. Yeah. So browser prefixes is something you give it to properties which are not natively supported by the browser. Well, I would not say it's natively supported, but they're not like they're not as friendly as to type in. So let's say, for example, we had a box class, and I wanted to do box sizing, and I type in like let's say 10 pixels, and now if I try to render it, it's not gonna work on any of the browser because they don't recognize what that is. So you kind of have to specify browser prefixes. So I would specify Moz box size, and then like there is a specific syntax that has to follow, which I don't remember. So I would say yeah, content box. So you type in content box, and oh, there should be just one. And then for making it support in Safari and Chrome, I use the WebKit prefix and do box sizing and content box, and this should be also be content box, right? So now if I run it on the browser, it will work because I gave it the browser prefix. So this is a little bit more advanced CSS, and I will teach you a way in which you don't have to remember all those prefixes, and it will automatically add all those prefixes for you. So don't worry about this right now. So the next thing I want to talk about, and this will be the last thing we will talk today, is forms. So obviously every website has a form, and what forms are basically used to is like used to submit information. So you can kind of like collect your users' information in any kind of way. There's different kinds of forms. There's registration forms. There's feedback forms, and like there's a bunch of different forms. It's like imagination's the key right here. So let's just make our HTML form. And for now, we will not record or do anything with it. We will just figure out like what layout and what like options we have with the form, right? So let's get, all right, so right here, we'll make our form. So make a form, we start the form tag, and so there's two attributes you need to pass to a form. One is called action, and the other is called method. And you close the tag. So what action means is like when I submit the form, how will I process it? So in here, you would either specify a PHP file which processes the form. So in this case, like form.php, and that will process your form. But for now, we'll leave it empty. And the method, so there's two ways you can send out information on a form: get and post. So the difference between get is it's a unsecured way to post information. It passes every data as a parameter to the URL, right? So like if you put in like your password and stuff, you kind of like see your password on the URL. So that's not the way we want to post forms. We want to post forms in a method called post, which posts securely that the user cannot, like, it's not going to pass in through the URL. It's a little bit more secured way, right? So don't worry too much about the method and action. We'll cover it when we go to PHP more. So just know that there's two different methods, get and post, and in this case we will use a post because we'll assume that the user is entering sensitive information, right, which we don't want it to be in the URL or anyone to see it. So in a form, you'll have an input box, obviously, where we want to collect the user's name. So to have input, we have input, and to have a text box, we just specify its type to text, and we give it a name, and let's name it first name, and we'll also give it an ID, first name, right? So you don't have to close it. So the reason we give the name is because when we get to PHP, and let's say when you submit the form and you want to get in the information of what's included in this form, like in this input tag, you will use the name to get that value from the form. So we want to specify the name. So let's just save this without any styling. Let's see what it looks like, right? So we have an input tag. We can enter random stuff in it. Cool. So obviously it needs some kind of label or something like that, right? So let's specify a label tag. And you would normally put a for attribute, and you would specify the name of the input for which the label is. So in this case, it will be first name, and you will close the label tag, and between the label tag, we'll put in first name, and see, it appears right here. So let's say you don't want to do a label tag. The other way you would do is you would actually just type in first name, and then you just save that. That will also do the same thing.
Really?
Because you're just rendering the text, right? But it's a good practice to put them as a label.
Okay.
So we'll have a label. Let's look at some different types. So HTML5 introduces some new input text types. So we have a name. Let's do one more. Let's get the user's email. So HTML5 has something called email, and we specify the name email. And let's see. And I'll give it ID email. And let's give this a label as well. So give it a label for email. I want an email. Okay. So let's assume that for this case we're just collecting his name and email, right? And maybe let's do a comment section. So let's first make the label for comment, and comments concerns, and we close that. So to do something like a bigger input text, like where they can enter like a bunch of different text, we'll use something called text area. So we just define text area. Very good. And just close that and just save that and see what it looks like. Right, so you have a text area. You can specify the width and the height of the text area, and like Chrome lets you like resize the text area, right? So I'm not gonna do any CSS on the form. And the last thing we do is a button to submit the form. So there's two ways you can do a button. So the old way before HTML5 is you type in input type, submit, and you close that. And you could do placeholder, which is like what is it's gonna be holding. Actually, no, for button it'll be just value. I haven't used this button in a very long time, as you can see, right? So in the value, you can type in what name you want in the button itself.
All right.
And the other way to do it is like simply type in button tag and type in the name right here. And it'll do the same thing.
Now, how do you specify what action needs to take once he clicks on that submit button?
What action to take, you specify and write the action.
Right, is the action method. Okay.
For now, we're leaving it empty because we don't want it to process or anything.
Okay.
Some interesting labels in HTML5 is something called required. So if I said required, this means that this form won't submit. This is just front-end validation for like this form won't submit unless you specify this email. So let's remove the button right here if we don't want two buttons and see what happens, right? Refresh this page. And let's just first try and submit it. See, it's telling me please fill this form. So the interesting part is let's just say test. And see, like since I specified a type email, it's kind of checks out if this input is an email or not.
Are there any other types like?
Yeah, there's a couple different types. I think there's a type for telephone number.
Right,
and
numerical, really characters.
Yeah, so like we do test.gmail.com and you see like submits a form.
Right. Or maybe no space or stuff like that. Maybe. So how many types are there?
Yeah, I remember though. Let's look it up. So input types form. So there's color, date, time, email, month, number, range, search, telephone number, time, URL, and week. So let's just like, so number is like you cannot like go between, like you can just you specify a number and you can specify a min and a max to a number.
Nice.
And I guess this is the number itself. Date is like you have to enter date. Color is like interesting. You can have like a color picker, but not all browsers support it. Like I guess this will work, so you can have like a color picker right here. Then there's a range. You kind of get like a slider kind of thing. Then month will give you a date picker. So like right here. Before making a website, or if it's for a client, you kind of ask him like, what is your target audience? Is it young people who, or like, is it people who are going to be using modern browsers and modern technologies? If there's a person who says like, I need it to support like IE8 or IE6, then you probably won't be able to use a lot of HTML5 functionalities.
Okay.
So like here you can see, right, which one is supported, which one not. So here, like the calendar picker, it says only Chrome, Safari, and Opera supports it. Firefox and Internet Explorer doesn't. So like you kind of do like your research. I think like that's it for today.